If you were born in 2002, you probably feel like your generation keeps stepping into adulthood during chaos. Right when we were about to experience normal teenage years, the world shut down. A global pandemic stopped everything. Schools closed. Graduations disappeared. Plans collapsed. And now, just as we are finally stepping into the real world, jobs, careers, independence, the news is filled with something else. Wars, global tension, economic instability, and people everywhere asking the same terrifying question. Could this become World War III? Sometimes it almost feels like our generation didn't just grow up. We were thrown into history. But the real question is this: why does it feel like our generation always has to step up during the hardest moments? And more importantly, what does that mean for our future? Today, we're going to talk about the strange reality of being part of the generation born around 2002. The generation that grew up during uncertainty and might end up becoming one of the most resilient generations in modern history. Part 1. The last normal childhood. If you were born in 2002, your childhood probably looked pretty normal. You grew up during the early days of the internet, before everything became algorithms and endless scrolling. You remember a world where kids still played outside. Phones were mostly for texting. Social media was just starting to exist. Platforms like early YouTube, Facebook, and later Instagram were still simple. Life felt slower, simpler. And even though there were global problems happening in the background, as kids, we didn't really feel them yet. For most of our childhood, the world felt relatively stable. Adults handled the problems. We focused on school, friends, and figuring out what we wanted to become. But something strange happened as we started getting older. The world started changing faster than anyone expected. And right when our generation reached the moment where life usually begins, everything stopped. Part 2. The pandemic that changed everything. In 2020, the world experienced something no modern generation had seen before: a global pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic didn't just affect health systems. It changed the entire structure of everyday life. Schools closed, cities shut down, airports became empty, graduations were canceled. For the class of 2020, 2021, and even 2022, important life milestones suddenly disappeared. Think about that for a moment. For many people born in 2002, senior high school ended not with celebration, but with lockdowns. No proper graduation, no goodbye moments with friends, no transition rituals into adulthood. Instead, we sat inside our homes, watching the world through screens. For months, then years. And during that time, something else happened. Our generation grew up mentally much faster than expected. Because when the world pauses, you start thinking about life differently. You start asking questions like, what actually matters? What kind of future are we walking into? What kind of world are we inheriting? For many people in our generation, the pandemic wasn't just a crisis. It was the moment we realized that life is unpredictable, and adulthood might not look the way previous generations described it. Part 3. The world we entered after the pandemic. When the pandemic started fading, everyone expected life to return to normal, but instead, the world looked completely different. Economies were unstable, prices were rising everywhere. Housing became expensive, jobs became competitive, and suddenly, entering adulthood didn't feel like stepping onto a clear path. It felt like walking into uncertainty. But that wasn't the only thing happening. At the same time, global conflicts started rising. International tensions increased. News about wars, military alliances, and geopolitical struggles began dominating headlines. For a generation, just trying to figure out careers and independence, the background noise of global conflict became impossible to ignore. For many young adults today, there's a strange emotional mix happening. On one side, we're trying to build our personal lives, find jobs, build skills, create stability. But on the other side, the world itself feels unstable. And that creates a unique psychological pressure our generation is facing. It's the feeling that just when life is supposed to begin, the ground underneath it keeps shifting. Part 4. Why every generation feels this. But here's something important to understand. Every generation enters adulthood during a moment of uncertainty. Think about previous generations. The generation before us faced global financial crises, major wars, Cold War tensions, economic recessions, and yet they still built families. They built careers. They created technology. They built the world we live in today. History has a strange pattern. Every generation thinks they're entering the worst moment in history. But often, those difficult periods are exactly what shape the people who eventually change the world. Because hardship forces people to grow faster, to think differently, to adapt. And our generation, we've already experienced things that most generations only encounter later in life. A global pandemic, mass technological transformation, global economic instability, and rising geopolitical tensions. That combination creates something powerful. Part 5. The advantage our generation has. Even though it feels like we were handed chaos, our generation also has something previous generations didn't. Access. We live in the most connected era in human history. We can learn almost anything online, build businesses from laptops, work remotely, collaborate with people across the world. Information is no longer controlled by a small group of institutions. It's everywhere, which means the opportunities available to our generation are enormous. But they require something different. Self-direction. Unlike previous generations, no one is going to hand us a clear path. We have to build it ourselves, which can feel scary, but it's also incredibly empowering. Because when the world becomes unpredictable, the most valuable skill becomes adaptability. And if there's one thing our generation has already proven, it's that we know how to adapt. Part 6. What it really means to start from zero. This is where the idea of back to zero becomes powerful. Starting from zero isn't failure, it's reality. Every generation eventually realizes that life doesn't come with a guaranteed roadmap. And sometimes the world forces you to start over. Rebuild, relearn, reimagine your future. But starting from zero also means something else. It means freedom. Freedom to define success differently. Freedom to create new systems. Freedom to build a life that actually makes sense in today's world. Maybe our generation didn't enter adulthood during peaceful times. Maybe we entered adulthood during chaos. But history often shows something interesting. The generations that grow up during difficult times are often the ones that build the most meaningful futures. Because they understand something others don't. Nothing is guaranteed. So everything becomes intentional. Outro. Final message. If you were born in 2002, and you feel like the world keeps throwing chaos at your generation, you're not imagining it. But remember this. History isn't just something we read about. Sometimes we live through it. And maybe our generation's role isn't to experience comfort. Maybe our role is to build the next chapter. From zero, one step at a time. Because the future isn't written yet. And the people who will shape it are the ones learning how to move forward. Even when the world feels uncertain.